Okay, so if everybody will go ahead and mute themselves, or if Penny, if you'll go down the list and mute everybody, that would be great. Before I get into my presentation today, I am going to turn it over to Susan Antoinette from the Warehouse Arts District Association. She just has a minute or so of things that she would like to speak with you. Susan?
All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us again today for Robert Simone's Waves and Water class. As Robert said, my name is Susan Antoinette and I am a Warehouse Arts District Association Education Committee co-chair along with Anna Broshears. A little about WADA. WADA stands for the Warehouse Arts District Association. And the Warehouse Arts District Association markets the art district and is involved in the master plan and district overlay for various art districts within St. Petersburg, Florida. Warehouse Arts District Association volunteers staff the Second Saturday Art Walk Trolley and have been instrumental in extending the boundaries covered by the trolley. We also act as an advocate for the arts community, representing the various artists and interfacing with the city and government entities, as well as coordinating community events. On behalf of our entire WADA Education Committee, we would like to present to you this live part 2 of 3 complementary online class. The focus of this series is painting the main characteristics of water. Last week was the block-in stage, and today Robert will focus on the development stage. 2 little logistic pieces. In addition to tonight's class, our part 3 of the series will be held next week Wednesday on July 22nd from 6 to 7:30. This class is suitable for all levels, working primarily in oils, water-based oils, open acrylics, and acrylics. And that's all I have. So I will go ahead and turn it on back over to you, Robert. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful. So once again, I'm going to ask everybody if you wouldn't mind turning off your video and making sure that you're muted. All right.
So just a little hint on that, if you're on an iPad or a phone, the 3 little dots, if you click that open, you should be able to get an opportunity to stop video. And it's on the bottom left-hand side of your bar if you're on a laptop.
All right, everybody. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today, and I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis of how things are going to go, and then I'm just going to dive right into it. I'm going to start with a little video. I think it's about 12 minutes or so, where I revisit my block-in. And then I'm going to critique a couple of your block-ins, and then we're going to dive right into a video or two about the developmental stage of the process. And y'all have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat, and we'll take pauses in between sections of the presentation and field some of those questions as we go. So without further ado, I am going to share screen and start a video.
Something that Sergei Bongard taught was that we should work our way around the entire canvas 2 or 3 times before moving to any sort of rendering. And I like the word modeling in place of the word rendering, but he said that it's entirely possible and often advisable to spend 90% of your painting time merely adjusting the big, simple shapes, really refraining from moving to any detail or rendering until those big, simple shapes are entirely satisfactory. So what I've done essentially is I've moved through the painting 1 time. And I've had an opportunity to step back, take a look at it, and evaluate some things. And I tell you, there's a lot that I'm satisfied with about this block-in. I like the color. I like the general value structure, but there are some improvements to those big, simple shapes, or refinements, if you will, that I can make. And so I'm going to work my way through the canvas one more time, just refining some of those shapes. And so one of the things I'm going to start by doing is I want to refine the shape of the wave right here. I think I can get away with pulling the peak of the wave up a little bit higher and also having more of an angle right there. And I think I can warm and deepen the darkest part of the wave at the wave base. And we'll talk about the anatomy of a wave at the end of the session. But, and then I think I can bring a little more color and a deeper value into the sky and still be fine. So I'm going to spend about 15, 20 minutes refining this block in just a little bit further, but I'm going to refrain from any amount of rendering of detail through that whole process. One thing that I really love that I'm seeing out in front of the wave here, just immediately in front of the wave, is this subtle sort of deep, it's a green color, and but it's a very gray green color. And so I'm going to try to re-emphasize that and bring that shape up a little bit more as it actually comes up a little farther. And I'm probably darker than I need to be right there. So one good thing to really get in the habit of is evaluating the color and value of the paint that you just mix and are putting on the pan. Evaluate that in about a stroke or two. You don't want to be out here over here painting for 15, 20 minutes before you realize you're using a value that doesn't really work or isn't appropriate for that spot. So it's great to get in the habit of working a little harder on the palette so that you don't have to work quite as hard on the painting itself. Transparent, deepest value at the base of the wave face. And I'm dipping the corner of my brush into some of that alizarin orange that I talked about. That is a purely transparent color, even though it is not a particularly dark color. And it's just warming up this sort of green, blue-green mixture just a little bit. And I just really feel like that, if I can nail that color, that's going to tell the whole story of the ocean right here. One thing about oil paint is that lighter opaque passages will cover darker passages a lot easier than a darker passage will cover a lighter passage. So if you err on a side too dark in a given area, you're just not going to get in trouble. Sometimes you will get in trouble if you err too light and then you want to go darker in that area, especially if you're still working wet into wet on a painting. That's a little more difficult. Another thing that I do sometimes is I'll refine shapes and adjust them using a paper towel. So what I do is I take that paper towel and I fold it in half again, fold it in half again, And then I'll dip a corner of it either into some mineral spirits if I happen to have that in the studio that day, or I can just dip into my medium. And that becomes a nice little eraser for pulling out areas that I want to reshape, refine. So I want to get this wave a little bit higher right here. And then I want to go down a little more and create a little bit of a hump right there. So then we'll go back into that little bit of a drawing mode like I did earlier, just to refine that. This part of the wave is called the peak, sometimes called the shoulder. And this part is called the tube. And really what we're looking at is the top of the tube. Incidentally, something that I think you may want to store in your memory banks there is that the only time you're going to have a hard edge on a wave is at the top of the wave, because everything else is moving. And so you never really can focus on a frozen edge at the bottom of a wave. It's moving. So as it's in motion, it's always going to be a softer blurred edge. But at the top, you can always focus at the top of a wave, even though it's moving at you. So that's where your more firmly held edges are going to go. Right in here, inside, at the top of the peak, there's a little bit of a shadow that we'll be able to see under there. So that's what I'm indicating. And there is a little bit of a value progression as the wave goes up towards the top. The wave face approaches the top of the wave. The water's getting thinner and thinner. And so the light penetrates a little bit more up there, so it gets a little bit lighter. So even though I'm really not into modeling stage right at the moment, I am just going to show that progression in values just a little bit into a little too much of a warm green. I want to get a little bit cooler so that looks a little bit more like Atlantic Ocean and a little bit less like Gulf of Mexico. Of course, these colors, I'll still be able to adjust them as I move into the modeling stage. But see how even just that initial starts to show the translucent quality of the wave. There's a subtle difference between translucency and transparency. When we're speaking about water, translucency is when light passes through the water and we see a change in color and value because of the light passing through the water. Transparency is when we can see through relatively clear water to something that's below. Another thing that I'd like to do is just darken the sky, especially on the left side of the canvas. Anytime you're painting a sky, there's a gradation in the sky. It doesn't matter. It's on any given day. You're going to see and want to impart into your painting a progression, not only from top to horizon, top of the canvas to the horizon, but also from left to right. So as I mentioned earlier, in this painting, the light is coming from the right and traveling into the scene this way. So the right side of the sky is going to be slightly lighter than the left side. And so that's a refinement to that big simple shape that really doesn't quite qualify as rendering yet in my mind. But watch what's going to happen to the apparent light in the painting. It's going to even look a little brighter as, that's probably a little darker than what I need. Sometimes, like I said, you got to work a little harder on the palette to get a good color. Don't just plow away and paint that whole sky without really evaluating whether you're using the right color and value or not. If you're not sure, that's probably an indication that you're not. And so just go back down to your palette and work a little harder. Yeah, I like that. Vertical strokes in the sky. I think I may have misspoke earlier in the video, and I used the word horizontal when I meant to say vertical. So predominantly vertical strokes in your sky. That's one of the classic errors that I see beginning painters especially make. You know, they're just not aware of how to use the direction of the stroke to express a plane or a form. And it just, you know, usually your sky is a long, narrow strip at the top of your painting, so you're used to just going like this. But it turns out that's not the most effective direction of stroke to depict the sky. All right, there we go. I think I'm liking that.
All right, everybody. I just want to let you know what that background noise was. I had a necklace on and I didn't realize it was rubbing up against my microphone, and I did everything I could to clean it up. That noise is not in the rest of the videos tonight, so I'm sure you'll all find that a relief. Penny, did we have any questions come through in the chat?
I don't see any questions yet.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to share screen again, and I'm just going to do a quick critique on two of the block-ins I got in. I got a bunch of block-ins from you all, and just don't have time to cover them all in this session. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a private Zoom meeting just with myself and your block-in, and I will record it, and I can send you a recording of my critique of your block-in. So that's going to be, I think, hopefully real beneficial for you. And so let's take a look at one of the block-ins. And I'm going to use this annotation function, and hopefully I can use it pretty well. I've been practicing a little bit with it. So here is one of the block-ins that I got in, and it's a good job. As we said last week, the object of the block-in, number one, is to cover the white of the canvas as quickly as possible. and number two, to map out the main design and your big silhouetted shapes. So obviously this, the whole white of the canvas was covered and shapes were initially established for the first time. And so just a couple of things, if this were my block in, where I would try to go with it to strengthen my overall design of the painting is, number one, we see a lot of parallelism here. So this line at the base of the wave and at the base of the wave face and the splash area, it's all pretty much lined up nice and even and pretty straight across. And then you pretty much, it's pretty straight more than halfway across until it gets about here. So there's a lot of parallelism going on there. And when you combine that with the idea that, okay, the horizon lines parallel with that, and then you have parallel lines at the top and at the bottom of the painting, there's a lot of sameness going on there. And remember that I said last week, and I probably said a few times this week in the coming videos, that it's variety that brings richness and beauty to your paintings. So what I would do here, or strive to do, is I would try to see if I can break up some of that parallelism, like, you know, the splash maybe is a little bit down farther, and the lip and curl come down a little bit farther, and then the flat lying plane maybe moves up a little bit farther. So now you have some breaking up of that fairly straight line that goes all the way across. And you could do, you know, a little reshaping, like maybe the top of this splash angles down a little bit because you're looking at the wave not directly straight on, but at a little bit of an angle. And so you can redraw that. And if you take the angle here of the splash, don't mirror. See, originally we mirrored this angle and this angle sort of mirrored each other. So that's a little bit of sameness too. So whenever I recognize that kind of thing going on in my painting, I just use my imagination, my best design acumen, and try to vary that so that I'm not creating a lot of parallel lines. Then one or two other things, and this is a pretty nice block in, so I should be equaling out my compliments. I can see that there is, she's paying attention to the difference in color between the wave face and the tube, and trying to impart variety in color in the background. There is some subtle variation in the sky going on. So there's a lot of good things, recognizing that there's a shadow side to the splash here and so forth. But when you really break it down, here's this distance and this distance are very, very similar. So we've got the edge of that splash kind of dead center. So I'd want to disguise that a little bit. And it could be that if you're just redrawing that shape a little bit this way, which I think is a little more like the reference, that'll kind of disguise that, putting that little spot right there in the very center. So what it boils down to here, and I'm reminded of a video that I watched with a guy named Charles Movalli. Charles Movalli lived and worked up in Cape Ann, in Rockport area of Cape Ann, and he was a student of the great, oh gosh, Penny, help me, the great Emil Gruppe. Emil Gruppe was my all-time favorite painter, lived and worked up in the Cape Ann area of Massachusetts. And saw this video on YouTube of Charles Movalli talking about Emil Groupie, and he talked about how surprised he was that Groupie was really conscious of spacing and distances. So that's something you really want to try to be conscious of, so that you're not repeating distances and sizes of shapes. So that's where I would head with this one. And I would maybe do a little bit of redrawing like I did at the end of my block in on the first session last week, is I just took a dark color and I redrew my shapes and got a nicer profile to them. Okay, let's take a look at another one. All right, here's another nice start. And the reason that I chose this one is because some of the same refinements that were needed in the previous one are probably needed in this one as well. And it's something that I saw in a lot of the various block-ins that came in. So, you know, there's a good conscious effort to check values. I'm pretty sure she was comparing the value of the sky to the value of this shadow, and a nice job of averaging out a value for this foreground activity in the foam blanket. But when I look at the various distances, oh boy, what did I do there? Okay. What happened? Hang on. All right. Sorry about that. Got a little confused. If you consider the distance from the top of the canvas to the top of the wave, and from the bottom of the wave to the bottom of the canvas, they're not exactly the same, but they're very, very similar. I would strive to create a little more variety there. You could easily move the wave up a little bit and create a little variation between this distance and the distance below the wave. And that would just be a matter of redrawing with a little darker color, like I said. And then similarly to the previous one, this distance and, oops, lost my drawing tool. And this, for some reason, things aren't working. Oh boy. All right, lost my ability to draw here. Let's try this one. And this distance, that puts that little juncture right there kind of right dead center. So if you consider it was equal distance from, so now you've got equal distance from top to bottom, from here to bottom, and almost equal from here to top. There's quite a bit of sameness there. So that is what I would work to overcome as I worked my way through this another time through this painting, still in block-in mode, to refine these big shapes. Also, you know, if you want to ask yourself, is the height of my sky, is that too similar to the overall height of my wave? So those kinds of things are what I would strive to improve. Same thing with this parallelism that's going fairly parallel all the way across. So that, I think if you're able to get in there and redraw and maybe just put some things a little bit at an angle. All right, so I mean, it's a great start, and those are just refinements that I would shoot for, and I think you'd be well on your way to moving towards the development stage of that painting. All right, so looks like I'm not seeing any questions, so I am gonna move forward with the next video, which is a little over 20 minutes, and it's the beginning of the developmental stage of the painting. So, you know, sit back and relax and enjoy, and here we go.
So here we are back for another session on the painting. I've already done a quick evaluation of the block-in that I developed in a previous session, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. So I feel like I'm ready to move to stage 2 of my process, which I call development. And you know, really for me, development flows seamlessly out of that block-in stage as the major shapes start to convey a high degree of harmony and truth, meaning that the colors and values of those major shapes start to really convey the impression of the overall major elements of the scene. So I kind of think I'm there, and so I'm ready to move in to development. And it's really during that development stage that modeling of form and distance and atmospheric perspective take place. And so really, it really also, that development starts from the central focal area of the painting and moves outward. So what I'm going to do is I'm just really going to go to work on this, the major part where the wave is starting to spill over and form a tube. That's my focal area. So I'm going to go right into that, start to develop some of the form there, and just move forward. So, all right, let's get started. So as we start to move into development, and we're going to start modeling the wave here, what we're really doing is bringing out the form of the wave, which implies that there's some value progressions that happen in all parts of the anatomy of the wave. So if we talk a little bit about the anatomy of the wave, what we really have is at the top of the wave right here, this is called the peak. So you have a wave that's folding over and coming towards you like that. There's a peak right there, and as you run down this line, that's called the crest of the wave. This area is called the wave face, or the wall. And as you move out here, it starts to be called the shoulder. And then this little portion right here, that's the lip, okay? And then we move down into the curl. And as that wave curls over, it forms a tube which goes inside, but we're looking here at the outside of the tube, okay? And there's a specific set of value progressions that happen across that tube that once understood, you can paint the form or the three-dimensional quality of that wave face. And then as we move this way, you're getting into an area that sometimes it's called the splash zone, or the over the falls zone, where that wave comes down and hits and splashes back up. So those are really the aspects that I'm trying to bring out in this early stage of development. And so I'm just going to start to look at the different value progressions right here in the tube. I know that's something that I can handle fairly well from experience. So it's a good place for me to start, because I know how to do it, and it gets me warmed up because I haven't had the brush in my hand for, you know, since overnight. So here we go. Just using some mixtures of my typical blues, the Viridian, a little bit of Prussian, a little bit of ultramarine, and don't want that to be too oversaturated, so I'm going to use a little touch of alizarin crimson to desaturate that blue-green a little bit. I may even do a little touch of my cadmium scarlet. That'll desaturate even a little bit more. I tend to subscribe to the painterly idea that you're best to hold some of your colors in reserve. There's strength in reserve. So I don't go for my brightest
Can't hear anything. His, your viewing screen. I don't know. Sound is, or somebody's writing sound is out. Okay,
shadow
there it is.
underneath the peak,
Back.
the lip right there. That's pretty similar in value to what's at the top of the tube. Then as the two mixtures of my typical blues, the Viridian, a little bit of Prussian, a little bit of ultramarine, and don't want that to be too oversaturated, so I'm going to use a little touch of alizarin crimson to desaturate that blue-green a little bit.
I just backed it up a little bit so that we can go back over the part where you weren't getting any audio, so you can hear what I was saying.
Even do a little touch of my cadmium scarlet. That'll desaturate even a little bit more. I tend to subscribe to the painterly idea that you're best to hold some of your colors in reserve. There's strength in reserve. So I don't go for my brightest capabilities of my colors right off the bat. Right at the top of the tube, there is always a little zone here that is kind of dark in value. And the reason it's a little dark in value is that you're looking through a thickness of water there. The top of the tube, it's I want to say it's really not much different than looking at a tube of paper towels. So right here at the top of the tube, you're actually looking at more water right there. So it's darker. There is also a little bit of a shadow underneath the peak and the lip right there. That's pretty similar in value to what's at the top of the tube. Then as the tube begins to spill over, it's starting to aerate a little bit. And as it aerates, that means it's getting more bubbles in it, starting to get some bubbles in it. It starts to get lighter in value. Notice for right now, I'm painting in the direction of the form, meaning along the length of the form. I'll blend that in a rolling over manner. And so it gets know, gets lighter as it spills over. Just getting that color and value up there. I will manage the edges here in a second. And then as it spills over and gets close to the splashdown, it starts to darken a little bit again. This part is not going to be quite as dark as the top of the tube is right there, but it does darken as it just before it splashes down. And if you go out to the beach and you look for it, you'll see that that is true. Then at the top of the tube, that rolls over, and the top of that tube is actually facing the sky. And so it begins to reflect some of the color of the sky, and it's a lighter value at the top there because it's reflecting a sky value as well as a sky color. So, and that's a little piece of the anatomy that's really vital to conveying the three-dimensional truth of a wave there, but it's also one that sometimes you might not notice it if it's not pointed out to you. Notice it's a narrow line there, but with these rosemary brushes, I can do it with a large brush quite easily. Really working hard down here on the palette to try to get a color that I'm super satisfied with. I want to restate that little darkest line at the top of the tube. It needs to be, in my mind, a little bit greener, a little bit of a warmer green there than a bluer green. So just refining it. There's some good basic information there. It's real subtle in my reference, but the water behind that tube is definitely darker than the information in the tube. So I'm gonna restate that back there because that's part of the form. What's behind this tube is part of what makes it read. And so I'm going to state that information back there. To make sure I've got a proper value structure. Notice I'm not going all out on all the subtleties in this tube just yet. It's really hard to tell also in my reference, but the wave face, this area is definitely darker than anything on that tube, but not necessarily by a lot. Remember, as wave reaches the crest up here, you're actually looking at thinner water. And so more light passes through it, so it's lighter up there. I just feel like this whole wave can definitely get a little lighter. probably some of my regular students right about now who may be participating in this virtual workshop, they're probably asking themselves, how the heck is it I'm painting without the music in the studio? And they know that I'm probably singing and dancing as I demonstrate, which I usually do. I just kind of thought all that stuff would be too distracting for the video. So I'm trying to paint without singing and dancing and music and stuff. And, you know, it seems to work. Right here along this lip, things are starting to foam up a little bit, and it's kind of a lighter value in spots, and it's pretty gray. It's not really holding or catching a lot of light. But notice how I'll make little test strokes like that, and when I do, I'm really just mostly just evaluating the value of what that little mark and making adjustments. It's so important to have beautiful, true, good values. True values sounds like a hardware store, but in reality, you know, if you're trying to convey a sense of authenticity, even though not every painting has to be photorealistic and overblown as terms of tedious, and still it's great to have a little bit of truth, I think. One of the better ways to make sure your paintings have some truth to them is that it's that value structure that makes them work. Just thinking that really, you know, what I'm doing here is I'm sort of painting a wave portrait. I just really thought that that would simplify and distill painting a wave down to one fairly simple yet essential aspect of doing seascapes and so forth. So maybe in the next lesson, we'll be able to cover some different aspects of painting water. It's really very exhaustive subject, and to convey all aspects of the whole subject in one lesson, I think would be quite a daunting task. I feel like that little reflection of sky at the top of the tube might be just a little too nondescript. I think the painting will bear a little more blue in the color in that area, so I'm just going to restate. That's definitely helpful. See how I'm carving the shape of that tube by using the value that and color that I see behind it, rather than trying to wipe it out, redraw it, and all that. I can just carve it. It's much easier. Just working away down here on the palette, mixing a gray using Viridian and Alizarin crimson and some white. Even though I have encroached, I've still got some of that original completely transparent color right in that area of the wave. And if I restate in that area, I think I'm going to restate with something that's completely transparent. A couple things to think about if you're trying to do some dark, completely transparent passages in your paintings. Something it took me quite a while to learn, and learn the hard way, is that you want to stay out of black in these colors, and you want to stay out of umber, like burnt umber, raw umber, especially if you're an oil painter, because those colors have, the pigment has a larger grain size, and when they dry, they reflect the light from the room in such a way that it makes them appear dull. So I'm always going to stay out of black and my raw umber when I'm painting a dark area like that, because you just run the risk of that drying matte, and then you're kind of in trouble. You'll lose the vitality, the beauty and vitality of that passage. Now that I've got a pretty good structure there, I'm just going to play for a moment with a couple of different color notes on the wave face, especially. Make sure it looks painterly, and I want to see just how far I can push some saturation. It starts to get too out of control, so I'll just knock that down with my knockdown knife. Just don't really want a lot of glare in the finished painting right there, so I'm trying not to have as thick of brush strokes in that part. So always sort of thinking about how things are going to show in a gallery setting. And that's something that you can really just learn by experience over time. It's sometimes the painting process is hard enough without trying to estimate what a gallery lights might be like. But let's see if I can push the envelope up here a little bit in terms of color saturation. don't mind that little bit of translucency. I just don't really like it when my paintings start to look like the painter of light, sort of cheesy, gratuitous special effects, you know. But done tastefully, it's really, I think, a good thing. So.
Okay, there we go. Let's take a quick look into the chat and see what questions came up. How do I decide? So this comes from Joyce. How do I decide what is warmer and darker between the tube and the crest? And I'm really just using my powers of observation, looking at the reference. And then I also have or at least I like to think I have a little bit of a library of information built up in the back of my mind from spending a lot of time at the beach, observing and painting the water from life. So it really just relies on that power of observation. You make your best estimate. And usually as the painting goes on, sometimes my best estimate isn't always accurate. And I become a little bit more familiar as I work on any given painting or any given part of any given painting. I become a little bit more familiar with exactly what it is I'm looking at. And so that's why I'm refining things as I go. No part of the painting is really done until the whole painting is done. So let's see, what else do we have? Great question, Joyce. Thank you. Can only imagine the singing and dancing, Linda. Oh, it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Robert, did you see that Amy had a question
yes,
about?
I'm addressing that right now. So, so Amy asks, is the only difference in the color of the tube dark to light? Is it the addition of white? No, I'm trying to read and do my best job reading there whether those greens are getting a little bit yellower, a little bit greener, or a little bit bluer. So there was actually not just adding white, but usually adding some yellow to piles of green along with a little bit of white. And it just takes a good bit of time spent before the canvas working on paintings as often as you can. And also I would recommend doing some painting from life, you know, set a tomato on the windowsill and try to see the progression in color and value as you're directly observing that tomato and try to paint it. And you'll train your eye to see those adjustments in color temperature. So quick answer, not just white, it's using other colors as well. Don asked, do you have a photo you can show us of your palette so we can see how many values you're mixing on the palette? I showed the palette, the basic palette in the beginning. I don't have any video or photos of the mixing process. Perhaps in a future video, I'll share the palette in the corner of the painting process so that you can see me mixing when I'm down there working on the palette. Let's see. Just paging through.
Linda asks if you could explain value structure a little further. If it's more, it takes longer to elaborate on that. Maybe you could do it in an email, but she wanted to know more about value structure.
So I can definitely elaborate a little bit on that, especially Linda, when I do a personal critique of your block-in. But And I think there's going to be more conversation coming out about values as I continue to work and in the next video that we're going to look at. Value structure is obviously it's just how light or dark a given area is. And that value structure is created by the way light plays out across a given object. So if you consider the photo reference that we're working from, that light is moving from the upper right and sweeping across towards the left. And so it's lighting up things that are facing directly towards the sun, and things that are not facing towards the sun are getting less light. They're not getting direct light, so they're falling into shadow. So basically, at the most elementary level, value structure is how light and shadow plays out across whatever your given subject matter is. And it's one thing, I think my wife would tell you, I used to sit at Mass on Sunday, and I'd be squinting at the priest while he'd be giving a homily, and she'd, what are you doing? And I was studying values. So when you're outside, you're at a restaurant, you're just sitting in your backyard enjoying the outdoors, just take some time and squint and study different objects to see how light and shadow plays out across them. That's your value structure. And you'll begin to understand it the more you try to see what I'm talking about. You'll have these epiphany moments where you go, aha, I'll get it. But with regard to value structure, I do have planned a video class, probably sometime in August, that's going to deal with the 5 types of light, which is the form principle, and that's exactly what that means. It's all value structure. So look for that to come out. Penny, are you seeing any more questions?
You mentioned cadmium scarlet, and that wasn't on your original palette. Is that the same as cadmium red?
Cadmium scarlet is, and I did mention it. Cadmium scarlet is just Winsor Newton's name for cad red light. So if I wanted to use that exact same color in another brand, it would be called cad red light. It's the same pigment, the same compound that's in it. It's just that Winsor Newton calls it cad scarlet instead of calling it cad red light. So exactly the same thing.
So one more question I see, do you take all those same colors with you when you paint plein air, and what type of pochade box do you use?
Oh, great question. I always paint with that same palette. I think it's 12 or 13 colors, so it's not really a limited palette, but it's not a spectral palette either. But it's a small enough palette that I can carry those colors with me, and I'll use it every painting, whether I'm indoors or outdoors. And unless I'm doing something for fun, like every once in a while, I may just take a very limited palette, like with ivory black and Venetian red and yellow ochre plus white, and just for fun to mix it up, you know. But 99.9% of my paintings indoors or out are done with these same colors. And the pochade box I use most often is made by Open Box M. I actually have 2 of them. One's a bigger one and one's a smaller one. So those are most often. I do have another bigger easel that's called an Anderson easel, or actually the modern version of it is called a Take It easel. But most often the pochade box is an Open Box M. Okay. Anything else, Pen?
That looks like it for now.
Okay, great questions, everybody. Thank you. We're just going to go right into the next stretch of video. We've got about 23 minutes left in the meeting, and I think we can squeeze this next video in.
So as I move into some of the light on this foam over here. I went to a clean brush because I'm switching temperatures completely from cool blues and greens. Now I'm over in sort of a yellowy orange family. You never really want to paint anything in your painting that's white, but it's lit by sunlight. You just can't get there with straight white paint out of the tube, because you're talking about a sunlit area that is warm in color. And your straight white color right out of the tube is actually the coldest color on your palette. So you've got to warm that up. And I've just got a variety of my yellows and my reds kind of all mixed together for this area where sunlight is striking this wave, splash zone there. And see, when it's got some warm temperature to it, it just has a lot more impact than if you were trying to do this with straight white. I'm also using a little bit thicker pigment in these areas. I always use more paint in the lights, thicker, more impasto in the lights than I do in the shadows. One of the reasons for that is that I'm a firm believer in the idea that it's variety that brings richness and beauty to your paintings. And variety can be in a number of different forms. One way of establishing a lot of variety in your painting is variety in the thickness of your paints. So that's really what I'm doing here. And I'm going to go back into some of the shadowy stuff on that splash there. So I'm going back to my cool colors, warm light, cool shadows. So I'm going back to a cool brush. This is a good area. Ultramarine and a little bit of raw umber will give you a nice, interesting sort of cool purpley blue gray. And so that's what my foundational mix is here for this passage right now. I'm going to see how it works on the painting. I really am trying to consciously not allow this to look fussed over, so that's why I'm making some very deliberate individual strokes. all this stuff here is moving. So I don't want to leave hard edges here. I'm just trying to get two different colors and values to blend in sort of inadvertently with the brush. So I have a soft transition from the tube into the foam. And we have to restate some of the form here on my tube. Goal here is to make this appear as though it's moving, or at least not look frozen in time, like pasted on something. There is actually out in front of this wave, or right in front of that splash area, is actually a cast shadow. And of course, cast shadows play an important role in making things have some dimension or appear to have some dimension to them. Softening that edge there because, like I said, this is all moving and you're not going to see hard edges at the bottom of a wave as it moves forward, only at the top. Get a little bit of a dark, deeper dark right up against the foam there. Really what that is something that's called the occlusion shadow. That's a little area where no light gets, not even the illumination of the sky above. So that's why that shadow sort of deepens and warms and darkens right in there, just ever so slightly. So also out front of that wave is a reflection, especially of the lightest part of that splash, and that reflections are of things that are in direct sunlight. They will be darker and cooler than the thing being reflected. So this lightest area there has to reflect on the surface of the water out in front of it, but its reflection is not going to be equal to that in terms of color and value. It's going to be a little darker and cooler. So in this case, I'm reading it as a little bit of sort of a gray, purpley, greenish, reddish gray. Definitely has some warmth to it, but real sort of a subtle color quality to it. Some of this stuff is going to be reflecting out here too, and it may end up getting obscured by further development in my foam blanket, but I'm just going to go ahead and put it in now. It definitely enhances the vitality of the whole scene. This is not necessarily a reflection. I'm just digging that color of that area there. They call the pocket. This little area right out in front of the wave face. Surfers would generally, I believe, call that the pocket. And I'm seeing a really neat sort of a oddball green gray out in front there, and I've got all these green grays going on my palette right now, so I'm just going to see if I can restate that. Actually a cast shadow right there, I think. And it's because there should be a little zone there that is actually in the horizontal plane and not up on the wave face. And this part of the wave should be casting a little bit of a shadow right in there. Yeah, that was important.
All right, there we go. So, hey Penny, is there any questions down in the chat? Pen? All right, let me see if I can find any questions down in the chat. Here's one. Mary says, do you take all those same colors? Okay, we already covered that one.
The only new thing is that someone has asked if you're going to share the recorded session with everybody.
Yes, so absolutely going to share the recording with everybody. I think I have a plan to avoid some of the confusion that happened last week when I tried to share a private link on my YouTube channel. I'm just going to save this recording to the Zoom cloud and send you a link, and you should be able to watch it right on the Zoom cloud without any problems. And then another thing that I'm thinking I may do, we're bumping right up to the end of the meeting. And I know some of you are probably all of you are going to want to work on your paintings that you have going. And we didn't have enough time in this session to really get into the next video, which has to do with me demonstrating the painting of that foam blanket out front. But I think I can do a one-man Zoom meeting and record that video and send you a link for that video too. You'll see what's going on. You'll be able to use that information as you develop your paintings. And then you know, hopefully if you have any questions about what we covered, and we can jump in and answer any questions at the beginning of the meeting next week. So in the meantime, I will also send each one of you a brief personal little critique of your block-ins, so that we can help direct you to where a good place to go would be on the next pass through your paintings. So anyway, we're getting down to 7:24. Do we get to see all of, okay, Bonnie asked, did we get to see all of the work sent to you? There was so much work sent, we would have spent this whole hour and a half responding and critiquing paintings. So I just critiqued a couple of them, and I'm gonna send each one of you a critique. So everybody that sent in a block-in, you'll get a critique, and it may take a day or two. But I will send it. Anything else going on, Penny? Did you notice any other questions?
So Susan mentioned that the recording will be posted on the WADA website as well. So if you wonder about that and don't get Robert's link, it'll be posted there. And Anna asks if you can show a reference photo, your reference photo again.
Oh, I should be able to do that if you can hang on just a minute. And then we're also gonna turn it back over to Susan so she can make some closing remarks. Let me see.
While Robert's looking for that, Susan, can you share with everybody the WADA website link?
Yes. Actually, I have a couple links that I will toss in the chat here in a minute. Do you want me to start my close while you are looking for that?
I'm gonna have that in a second. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And I'll show it.
Okay. We'll pop back to Robert. I want to thank everyone. Thank Robert, first off, for being a WADA member and supporting our goals to provide our members the benefit of free education classes. I will toss up Robert's website and WADA's website links here. I'll put those into the chat here in a minute. Look for Robert teaching classes in person on our WADA campus in the future. And when you become a member of the Warehouse Arts District Association, you gain access to a wide variety of benefits, like today's free class, for example, member profile on the WADA website. Every week, our WADA Community Digest features a member, are able to exhibit in the WADA member shows, able to apply for studio space at the Arts Exchange and adjacent plaza, able to rent the classroom at the Arts Exchange. You are joining artists from across the community. Access to our WADA member network Facebook page also. And if you are not a member and you like what you learned tonight and would like to make a donation to WADA, please do so at the www.warehouseartsdistrictstpete.org/donate. And I will put that link in there as well. And if you'd like to join WADA, I will put that link in there. So I'm going to toss all those links into the chat, and I will let it go back to Robert to finish up. So just thank you very much for joining us tonight. All right. Thank you, Robert.
You bet. Here we go. Here's the image of our reference that we're working from. So you can see that I'm loosely following the basic design of what I see. You know, I've changed some of the proportions of things in my painting as well. So, all right. Just before we check out, I want to mention, please take the time to come and visit robertjsimone.com. At this point in the development of the painting, I'd like to pause and bring up a topic that I think is highly critical and very, very technical aspect of the painting process, and that is something that I like to call herding goats. So I'm thinking of a television show that I used to watch with my wife, and it was about these three beautiful young women who had to leave the big city and go back to the family ranch because their parents had started aging and needed help caring for the ranch. This is one of those BBC type of shows, and it was a goat ranch. So there was a scene in every episode where the three beautiful young women would be moving the goats from one side of the ranch to another, and they'd be driving them down, on foot. They'd be driving them down a main road that cut through the ranch. And it was during that portion of every episode where they'd talk about the problems they were having caring for their parents, or they'd talk about their love lives or what have you. And invariably, one or two goats would peel off from the main herd and go do its own thing and fall back away from the herd. And so one of the sisters would volunteer to go get them and whoosh them on up to the main herd. And while she was gone, the other two would talk about her. So it was really cute and just a nice, fun show to watch. And here's how I think it relates to painting. So when you're in the developmental stage of a painting, you're starting to bear down on maybe one given area for a little bit, such as I've been bearing down on the main wave. It's nowhere near completion in that part of the painting, but I've brought it along and developed it quite a bit. So now there's other areas of the painting that are lagging behind. They're kind of like those goats that peeled off from the main herd and need to be brought back up to the pack. So I'm going to start moving, especially to this foreground area, the foam blanket, and I'm going to see if I can develop that a little bit and bring it up to the same level of development that I have in my main wave, and then I'll have to do the same thing with the background water and so forth. Okay, so I'm mixing a couple different piles of gray here. One is pretty light in value. That I'm mixing from Viridian and Alizarin, and mixing a darker gray. It's probably warmer, and it's coming out of my burnt sienna plus ultramarine plus white. And there's a lot of activity going on in this foreground, and it's basically two values, one for the water underneath the foam and another for the foam itself. And I'm not really counting any values for highlights that are in the foam. So, when you think about it, well, what I did in the initial block-in really was I averaged everything out. So that foam blanket area there was not in any place really as dark as the darkest parts of it or as light as the lightest parts of it. I just averaged things out to a medium value, and now I'm going to develop that more and put a more full range of values in that area. A foam blanket like that is going to have quite a lot of interesting patterns. You don't have to really watch and copy what you see as much as you have to make an interesting painting. So with that in mind, I'm just making some nice gestural brush strokes, and hopefully it'll all come together in a harmonious whole. One of the things that I had planned right from the beginning was there's a little piece of foam wave here, and I wanted to connect that right to the foam blanket that's out in front. Might be getting a little too warm in some spots there for foam. The color of the foam is going to take some of its influence from the water below and from the sky above. So it's some variations in grays that run from warmer to cooler, and just try to make a nice, interesting pattern. And I stated earlier, sometime I think during the block-in process, that I wanted to see if I could use a pattern in the foam to just direct the eye up towards my focal area. And so that's what I'm sort of building up to right now. I also feel like if I get some nice layers of warm or wet paint over top of the dry paint that's there, then I'll be able to get some interesting effects. One of the things that you may notice as I'm getting some paint up here on the canvas is that I'm also making some Z-shaped strokes, big, like this, big Z strokes, and the Z, opening in the Z is getting wider as I come towards the bottom of the painting. And that is, believe it or not, it's a really interesting way to express perspective in the flat-lying plane. That will aid in the idea of this is closer to the viewer's feet and they're looking more down, and as the Z gets flatter out here and then widens, it gives the illusion that they're looking at a plane that's a little bit of a distance away from them. So in the reference, there's kind of a heavy swath, a big swath of some foam coming through this area that I like, and it seems to have a warmth to it, which may be owing to the sun, or it may also be owing to a lot of sand churned up by the action of the water, or it could be both. like it though, so it's a nice bit of variation, and I can always, if I overdo it, I can always break it up, and I probably will be doing some of that here in a bit. One thing's for sure, I'm definitely not as light as I could go. I'm squinting and I can see that this area, which is the lightest, brightest part of the painting, is still lighter than anything I've got going on down here. So that means I have room to add some highlights that relate to that down here in the foam blanket. If I had gone too light in that passage that I just painted, then I wouldn't be able to put any highlights in. So then the painting would suffer from not having a full range of the 5 types of light in there. So notice I am now gone into another sort of a purpley iteration of that same puddle of paint, and it's just a little bit darker than that sort of yellowy area that I just put up there, and I'm just letting it mix inadvertently or spontaneously with some of the other colors. And the reason it works is because it's a level of variation. It's so that area of the painting just doesn't become, one static value and one static color. Nature is never really like that. So that's why I always sort of, I don't know if preach is the right word, but I do like to talk about the idea that it's richness and beauty, it's variation that brings richness and beauty to your paintings. So you want to find ways to install subtle variations in color, subtle variations in value to any one given passage. You just don't want to paint them one big flat color and value, like you would your bathroom wall or something. You want to get some variation going on. And so now I am pulling some of the color of the water into that pile of foam that I have on the palette, and just trying to create another subtle, slightly darker trail or color for the foam. So another thing that I can do is I can use some of these foam trails, the way they curl and bend, to help direct the eye into this area of the painting where my curl and my tube is, just by angling them back, so that's going to direct the eye up into that area.